Good afternoon and welcome to today's MS-ISAC, EI-ISAC National Webinar, which focuses on the topic of Foundations of an Application Security Program. We have a great turnout for today's event with about 500 registrants signed up for this webinar. As some background for today's webinar abstract information, breaches and hacks are in the news almost every day. Many breaches are a result of common software flaws in applications, and criminal organizations have the resources and motivation to exploit these flaws. Unfortunately, software developers are often underserved when it comes to security strategy. Building an application development security program assists developers in building applications with attention to good software security practices, addresses risks, and reduce overall costs of development. From proactive requirements to coding and testing, this webinar covers the best practices an organization must consider as the foundation of building an application development security program. Today's presenter, we're proud to announce, is Dennis Lieber, who is the Chief Information Security Officer for the Cabinet for Health and Family Services for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Dennis started his information security career in the military and has worked in the automotive industry, healthcare, federal government, and finance industries as an information security leader. Dennis has a passion for information security and igniting that same passion in others to create future leaders. Dennis has taught information security courses at different colleges and speaks regularly at conferences and group events. With all of that said, Dennis, thank you so much for participating as our presenter on today's national webinar, and we'll turn things over to you now.
All right, thank you. Glad to be here. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar. I'm really excited about this one because throughout my career I've found that a lot of organizations are lacking an application security strategy and program. So this presentation today is put together as a foundational and informational presentation. So when I developed this presentation, I envisioned not just technical folks and security folks, but also our business managers and our CEOs and the leaders that have the influence of our industry to consider and build a application security program. So what are we going to talk about today? Why you need an information security program that addresses application security and the application development considerations when you build that program, challenges of secure coding, overcoming some of those challenges, and the overall benefit to that program. So why does your organization require an application security program? Well, the first answer to that is you develop apps. A lot of folks out there may be going, well, I don't develop apps. Well, the same is true for organizations that don't develop apps, organizations that ingest apps. This is, your small businesses that resource everything out to vendors. Those applications that you are utilizing, you still need a strategy of how you're ensuring that you are being provided a strong or secured and minimal risk application in your environment. The other reason why I like to say we need an application security program is because criminals like to commit crimes. So the criminals, changing the word hackers to criminals, hackers help us and criminals hurt us. Criminals look for those vulnerabilities, and known vulnerabilities are those very weak coding practices in developing your applications and take advantage of those. And once they can defeat one application, a lot of times it gives them the keys to the kingdom and they can move laterally throughout your environment, which is very dangerous to all of us and damages your reputations and can cost, the latest news, we're talking millions and millions of dollars now to recover from incidents like that. It should be a part of your security strategy. Most organizations have at least a baseline and do a due diligence of putting a security policy in place or a security strategy, and that's just part of having a good security strategy. And again, it ties into the business risk. It's not just a risk, it's an overall business risk. And then finally, one of the big drivers of why you have to have one of these programs is a lot of times you fall underneath a federal, state, or regulation or an international regulation, depending on where you live or operate, that requires you to do secure coding or provide a means to reduce the risk when someone is connecting to you. So what are some of the considerations that I should put in place, or a security leader should put in place, or a business leader should have in place when you start building a program? And these are a lot of the things that I talk about, that before keyboards ever touched, before dollars ever spent, you've got to have a policy. And as you know, policies lead to procedures, and procedures dictate processes. You really have to take the time to sit down and develop policies. And again, this course is high level. We could spend a whole week talking about the policy development around these things, but the idea behind the policy is sitting down and logically thinking about what it is you're trying to accomplish and what is your mission or your goal. And there's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of communities out there. There's a lot of, our friend Google. There's a lot of things out there where you don't have to recreate the wheel on this. You have to understand what the methodology is of development. So, and I'm generalizing here, keep it simple, but there's really maybe 3 ways to develop applications. A lot of folks are familiar with the waterfall method. Then there's Agile, which is taking off around the world in a lot of places. And then what's the third one I like to call reality development, where depending on regardless of what you call yourself doing, there's the stuff that really happens. So getting a good grasp around your application development procedures and processes and methodology is key before you start trying to develop a security program around that. You've got to have a security strategy in place. You really have to think about the mission and the goals and what you're trying to do there. A lot of things that help the developers in application security programs is having design tenets, teaching them about the regulations, and I've got PCI as one of the examples there, but there's numerous. There's HIPAA and high trust and the IRS and the Social Security Administration for here in the States. A threat modeling program, to me, is one of the key things that you should do in an application security development program. But that in itself, again, could be a whole new course. You have to learn that. You have to take it seriously and really apply resources to it. And then finally, one of the other considerations is testing. And I like to use some real-world examples. Recently, we had an application where a very small change request was put in, and no one thought it really made an impactful difference. And it wasn't regression test as well as we would like, and it actually ended up creating a vulnerability where folks could see other people's tax forms, which is very serious. It was a report to the IRS. So those are the kind of things you got to think about when you're developing these strategies in your program, not just testing as we think of an application development testing, but how do we test for the vulnerabilities? How do we test for the exposure of PII or the dangers that something may put in place for your application? Some of the other ones, and these are key to me, risk assessments. And I'm going back to, remember, this is before we ever touch the keyboard and start developing. Doing risk assessments, doing business impact analysis, taking into consideration and doing those same 2 exercises around your physical infrastructure, you can develop a very robust and secure, almost unhackable application. But if you put it on a server that's not secured well, it kind of defeats the purpose, right? The other exercises that we like to implement is data mapping, understanding where the data is flowing and how it's being utilized and transferred across your infrastructure. It lends a lot of help to designing that security program. Understanding what kind of data you're collecting, where you're collecting it, why you're collecting it. Then you can get into some questions of, well, do I even need to do that? And that's going to help with your application security program, because you may understand that I don't need to hold on to all that data, and it makes the risk platform a little smaller for everyone. How am I storing that same data? And then one of the things I found over my career is this part kind of gets forgotten about is, how long do I need to keep data? How am I getting rid of that data and ensuring that data is gone? It's not living out somewhere on my database servers and just getting old and vulnerable and under attack. And then that ties into the decommissioning of these applications. You know, a lot of applications don't live forever, and what are we going to do with those applications? If those are the kind of things you think about beforehand when developing an application security program, it's going to save you a lot of headache in the long run. Challenging the secure coding. So again, I'm going to relate back to my current role of some of the challenges. We use vendors, we have internal developers, so there's a lot of challenges there with managing the different folks that are developing applications and how do you set the standards for them, and that ties back into why you want to have an application security program. Because now in our organization, if you're an internal developer or you're a vendor that we hire to come in to help or build something for us, the standards are all the same. That ties into, you know, an example. In my organization, we have about 450, give or take, in-house developed applications. Some of them are newer and some of them are legacy applications. So having a robust application development program, security program, aids in us going through and assessing those applications and how are we securing them, what's the life cycle on them, and it ties back to that decommissioning. Having thought those things out really helps with reducing the risk to business. And you'll hear me say that a lot because that's the overall goal. And all of us understand at this point that no one's unhackable, but we want to make it as hard as possible and recover from it as quickly and easy as possible. A good example, too, is Target, and most people remember the Target breach, and the story is that it was hacked through the air conditioning, the HVAC system. You know, that's the other consideration on these challenges of securing your coding is what are the APIs and the interconnections and the, you know, the communications between applications and how are you segregating them. So that's where a lot of people believe it gets too costly. And I have a simple rebuttal to it's too costly. Look what it costs when you are breached and recover from. So it's not a lot behind discussing it's too costly. It's easy to compare the numbers to do it beforehand or afterhand. There's a saying I like to tell my family and my children, pick your hard. You know, I had a daughter, she was working out, and she thought she gained weight. And she was like, oh, my God, it's so hard to go work out all the time. But then she always complained about how it was to be a little overweight. And I use that analogy here. Pick your hard. One hard has a better reward than the other one. Functionality and speed to market outweigh security. We've heard this a lot of times, and you probably experience this even in your organization. Projects say, well, we have a deliverable, and we have a timeline to get that deliverable out. And that often can outweigh your security practices. The other one is, I've heard folks say this, and I cringe, and, well, we're behind a firewall, so we're safe. The find and fix methods, and finally, the tools and resources that are available to the developers and development teams. And I will get into a little bit more of overcome some of those challenges as we move on. And speaking of that, that's where we're at. How do we overcome a lot of these challenges? I always start with training. Training should be ongoing for your developers. Your senior developers that have exhibited a secure coding practice and have developed your code should always be teaching, developing, training the junior developers. In my instance, I'm lucky to have a very robust security assessment pen testing team that are very knowledgeable and do a wonderful job. And we take the monthly trends that we find throughout our security assessments, we document that for the application development teams, and then we do desk side training, or we organize training depending on how schedules and projects are going. But the pen test team goes and shows the developers, here's what we found, here's how we found it, here's how we recommend you fix it or do it differently in the future. We've also woven our security application program into the development process. So being a government entity, even though we're a state entity, we're subject to many federal regulations, so we follow the NIST cybersecurity framework. And what we've done in a little bit of an innovative way was taken the requirements and turned them into checklists. Then we in turn took those checklists and turned them over to the PMO office. The PMO now include the security requirements for application development into the planning and development. So now they have the requirements, the information, and a lot of the know-how at the beginning of the project, and it's easier to track, and it's worked well for us. Constant communication, and what we've done with the checklist as part of that, we have an open dialogue between the developmental teams, be it our vendors or our internal ones, with our security team and our architects and our pen test team. I mean, it's nothing to see them walking back and forth throughout the day, and it helps a whole lot. The business risk management, you know, some organizations are more mature than others in this area, but you have to include your business risk management in it and make sure that you are including the risk that the security office finds up to the enterprise business risk management office. And if you don't have an office, I mean, if you can do it ad hoc, you've got to communicate those. Something's better than nothing. All this ties into creating a culture of security. It's just like any other change or cultural change in an organization. You have to start, you have to go out and meet people, you have to talk, you have to explain why you're doing, you have to explain the benefits, and over time it becomes the norm. Other things that we've done is create competition among developers. This has been a little bit of fun. I always tease them that I'm going to go to Target or Walmart and buy one of the fake WWE wrestling belts, the world champion belts, and developers that find security violations and fix them, or they self-correct type of thing. I mean, we do these things, we recognize them, but, you know, I keep teasing about the belt, and I think someday I'll probably do that, and they can compete for the belt. The templates is another big one. We've done the templates with the NIST cybersecurity framework requirements, but what we've also done, for an example, in our organization, we have a self-created single sign-on solution. So to connect to that single sign-on solution, there's obviously a standard base of code. So now we have templates in our code of, this is the code you use. Now, obviously, we do static and dynamic reviews on this code. We're constantly reviewing it and making sure it's the latest, greatest. But it also helps because now we really can, not like a GitHub cut and paste or a Google cut and paste, we really can get developers some cut and paste items that we know are, at the moment, the most secure we can create, and use those. And then obviously, I think it's one of the very important things is static and dynamic testing, and it's ongoing throughout the whole development process, not just at the end or the beginning or the middle at milestones. We really work to have, I call it the spell checker. When you're in your Microsoft Word document, you get a little red line under your Word, and it gives you suggestions on, you know, how you could probably do that differently or correct. And we found that to be very rewarding and cost reducing, because you can catch some mistakes or less secure codings early on and change it right there while you're at it. So more overcoming challenges. This is a big slide, because this is one of some of the most important things to me is the best practices. You know, don't recreate the wheel. There's a lot of information out there and a lot of communities and secure coding communities and websites where you can take these best practices and put them. The other thing that we use for overcoming challenges is recreating our program and our policies and our processes that are auditable. Can I go back and prove that I'm doing, or what we asked you to do was done? And that just makes for good governance. A certification and validation process. You know, again, this is one of those areas where we could probably spend a day talking about it, but if you have that in place, it's going to help. The standards, look at the standards in your industry, look at the standards such as NIST, HIPAA, you know, those help a lot, because a lot of those explain and spell out in black and white what you have to do. Communicating your expectations. Make it easy for the developers, and that's where I tie it back to like the templates we've done with the expectations put out in the PMO office. We try to make it repeatable. And then the last thing I have there is in red, and this is Dennis Lieber's opinion, but I could put some very good quantifiable facts behind this. To me, it's the most important thing you can do in developing your application security development program is have a pen testing team. And if you can't have a pen testing team, you know, at least donate some dollars to third-party vendors that do these type of things. it's been invaluable with our application development team. Again, what they find, we teach. Having that going on throughout the whole process, we don't just do it at iterations. We attack the developers sometimes while they're developing. Really returns volumes cost-wise, and just it's repeatable. We teach from it. It's lessons learned from it. And at the end of the day, it proves, it goes back to being auditing and governing. I mean, if you don't have a pen test team, I suggest you try to get one. And if you can't get one, invest somehow. Learn it. Call me. I'll help you. So the benefits of the program, we've gone over some of it and reiterating these things, but if you had to sell this, it protects your system. It protects the data that you've been charged with or you have started collecting. It protects your business. And those first two tie into protecting your business. You've got your reputation at stake if you have customers' data. And I don't have to preach to this. It's like preaching to the choir when we talk about this, because the media has done a good job for this in recent times. You've seen what happened to these companies that have breaches. They spend millions, if not billions of dollars. They lose customers. Their stock goes down. You pick it. It's horrible. And guys and gals lose their jobs over these same breaches and these problems that poor application development is a part of. We know there's other reasons for breaches, but a lot of the times when my pen test teams are attacking, we find weaknesses in applications, and then it gives us the ability to traverse laterally all over the place. You're going to reduce risk, and I put that back on there too, because when you're talking to business leaders outside our IS and IT world, business risk holds a lot more weight. We're talking about dollars and the profitability of a company. And I also tie that in there because we know no one is unhackable. So reducing the risk, and you can put it in terms for others that, the simplified, it's like having a house with no burglar alarm and no bars on the window, and then a house with the whole security system and the dogs and the armed guard. I mean, yeah, some people see that as a challenge and are going to go after the harder target, but usually criminals, they're going to go out the easy route. It increases your customer confidence. If you can demonstrate to a customer, and a lot of times this is good for folks that are resellers of business or providing IT security or services, when you can show that you have a robust program, you've got measurements in place to prove that it's as robust as you're saying, you're going to increase your customer confidence. And even at the state government where I'm at, when we can show the citizens that we're trying to protect your data and reduce the risk to it as much as we can, it makes them feel a little better about conducting business online, or that the state really does have their best interest in place. And then I always go back to reducing costs, because when you're talking to your other C-level executives that aren't in the IT or IS world, it's about money. And it's always going to be about the money. So if you can show through your program, before and after a program, if you didn't have one, where as you were developing apps or acquiring apps, you were spending a lot of money doing fixes and testing, as opposed to what you're doing now, you're going to save in the long run. Fixing things in production are a lot harder than fixing it while you're building it. So I believe I've covered most the items I wanted to cover, and again, it was very high level. It was aimed at a very broad audience, because we could take any section of this and make a week-long class out of it. So with that, I'm going to go to what are some of your questions. I know the moderators are trying to help with the typed-in questions, and we'll start taking a few if we can get that going.
Absolutely. Dennis, thank you so much for a great presentation. So just a reminder to all of our attendees today, feel free to submit any questions that you might have for Dennis on the topic of application security and the foundations of that. So we do have a couple questions. Some that I can take care of up front is there have been a couple questions about whether there's a recording of this webinar that will be provided. So we are recording this, and the recording will actually be uploaded to the MS-ISAC, EI-ISAC website. So when you went to register for the webinar, we will have the recording on that page. And if Dennis would like to, we can follow up with all of the registrants of the webinar and send along the recording that way as well. So that is an option in terms of being able to view the webinar on demand after the fact. So there have been a couple questions on similar topics, Dennis. So one of the most recent questions that has come in is, how do you handle agile pen testing? How often do you run assessments? How do you get around the change freezes required for testing Windows? So that was a couple of questions in one.
Yeah, that's a good question. So currently at the Commonwealth, we do not do Agile. I'm not opposed to Agile. I'm actually certified in some Agile. I'm a certified, I forget even what it's called now because it's been so long. It's been almost a half a year since I got certified, the product owner, so which is a little bit different than the Agile practitioners. You know, in the Agile process, it goes back to some of the things that we've put in place. Developing your testing up front, it becomes a part of the development process before you ever touch a keyboard. Understanding these are the requirements that are going to be in place, those deliverables, what are those outcomes, and then developing the tests for those as well, saying, you know, this is what we want, and creating those profiles for those that are familiar with Agile, and I'm simplifying this, they create entities, they create people, and, going in and going, I am Susie, the hacker who likes to steal PII, and this is the process that I usually do to do it, and then building that into the test cycles of your Agile development. And I hope that answers the question somewhat for you a little better. The other part of that question was, how do you run assessments? And I'm assuming that is as far as an Agile assessments or just assessments in general. So I'll take it from an in general process is we schedule assessments many ways. We have the categorization and the critical assignments of applications, and we prioritize those, and we run regular assessments on them. When we have application development programs going on, unfortunately, and it's not a bad thing, but the state still pretty much follows that waterfall method, but along the lines of that reality one I'm talking about, where it's a mismatch and mismatch. We schedule them early with the PMO. We go, here's some key places that we feel an assessment is due. We always do assessments after application is code freezed and before it goes into production. And I think it kind of answers that question about getting around the freezes. We've instilled this into the culture there that applications don't go live. We're the last checkoff until we say, hey, this is what we found. And then there's always a negotiation afterwards, right? If we have found some things, but they're not really critical or high, we may agree to, hey, you've got a roadmap to fix these, but you can still go live with it. And there has been instances where, like, there's some critical things in there that's just too much of a risk to go live. And that's when you start getting into those business discussion of what are the risks and how do we go forward.
Great, thanks, Dennis. And now that we're in the Q&A part of this, we are getting a lot of questions in. So on the topic that you were just discussing, a follow-up question, if you will. So in your situation, do you have your developers review their own code, or is it a separate pen testing team that is doing the code review?
Yeah, that's a good question, too. It's a combination. We do not let developers – I mean, I don't say we do not. If you want to review your own code, obviously you can proofreading your emails. We don't discourage you from reviewing your own code. Now, as far as formal code review, we have a few ways we do it. So senior developers will do review code. We have architects that are assigned that'll do code review. We do utilize automation tools for static and dynamic code review as well. And then, yes, we also have the pen test team. So we attack it from several ways, and some of it's situational. There's time constraints. There's at what points we do those. But generalized and simplifying it, that we do that combined effort of senior developers, security architects, pen test teams, And a lot of my security team are former coders, and I'll tell you, coders make great security people for career changes, but we have a few processes like that we do.
Great, thank you so much. Now, I know you touched on this, I think, in the slide about overcoming challenges, but there was a question that came in about templates. So can you share any templates or discuss any templates of security requirements that you wove into the development process?
Yeah, sure. I've seen that question too. I'd be glad to share some of our templates. The simple, I like the simple things. The simplified premise of our templates is we follow the NIST cybersecurity frameworks which are based on the NIST 834 Rev 4 security controls, and we just crosswalk those to all the other requirements such as HIPAA, and then we take items like the CIS controls, OWASP, secure coding practices, and we basically try to simplify it down as best we can of here's what we expect you to do when you code. And it expands way beyond that, right? If you're building a server, we have the controls of secure server. How are you collecting data? How are you proving? And how are you proving the data? Because we don't only just want you to put the controls in place. We don't want you to tell us how you're securing the data. We also want the proof. We're real heavy in the auditing and governance side of it too. So, it's like, telling me you love me, but how do you show me you love me?
Great, thank you again. And the questions keep coming in, so we'll do a couple more here. A lot of attendees are asking about automation. So question is, do you build security testing tools into automated deployments?
Yes and no. So yes, we build in automation where we can. Some of it is just because of the maturity of the programs are still moving along. There was some foundational building we had to do. You can't build a castle until you build a foundation. So yes, we automate when and where we can, and we are constantly moving towards that. I do believe in automation. It's a time saver. It's a money saver. It removes some of the human error. So to simplify that question is yes, we build in automation where we can, and we continue to go down that road.
Perfect. And I think that kind of touched on a lot of people's questions about automation. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, how do you address security concerns in legacy applications with no current development?
So that goes back to the earlier statement where we talked about we categorize and classify all our applications. It was a long, hard exercise when I first got there because remember I told you we had about 400 plus, 450 plus or minus, and just go down the list. I mean, you can imagine even with the team I have, there's the resources to do that is challenging, and you got to look at, what's my return on investment? I could hire 100 people to do that, but is that really financially feasible for the business? And you got to remember, well, we're a state government, so we spend federal and state taxpayer money, and we have to be good stewards of that. So we have to really think through of the investments that we do. But we do. We classify, we categorize the applications, and we just go down the list. We work through them as we can, and it's an ongoing, never-ending effort. Because we actually kind of put it on a rotating schedule. We don't ever want to say test once and done. I mean, we want to keep going through that list. And we don't always start, from number 1 to number 450. Just because number 1 is the one we've deemed as the most important, most critical application doesn't mean that we always go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because we use Target as that supporting, HVAC system. I guarantee within your organization, you would probably classify the HVAC system as number 450, but 450 is the one that lets you in. So we really look at the risk of all of them, the interconnection. There's a lot more parameters around that, and again, we could spend a whole week talking about that as well. But that's our approach to that.
Great.
And to add to that, and the other thing we added that, the only other small thing I added that is, we do challenge the IT department and all the business units to go review your applications, and are you still using them, and can we just decommission them and get them the hell out of our environment?
Okay. I think we'll wrap up with 2 questions here, and then we'll wrap up the presentation. A couple of attendees have submitted some questions revolving costs. So I know you touched on this in your slides about overcoming challenges and benefits of the program. So, for example, a local government who doesn't have a lot of legroom for additional costs in their organization. How would you justify this to leadership? How would you get this off the ground in terms of making sure they know how important an application security program is?
Well, I go back to a lot of those key points I put on the slide. That's the foundation of the justification. But business likes to see numbers. I mean, there may not be a lot of historical archival data, but you're going to have to go dig. I mean, this is what, pick your hard, right? So go do some work. Find out what you're spending on it now, and then go out and collect there's all kinds of research out there. There's all kinds of data out there that shows you the benefits of doing it one way or the other, and present that. And, always present it from, we're spending $1 million now, but if we do this, we can spend $100,000, and we saved, our company or the taxpayers $900,000. I mean, you really have to break it down to that simplest form, but it takes a lot of effort and research and data collecting, because not everyone does a lot of metrics or data collection. I mean, we've all inherited these challenges. I inherited some with this organization, but you got to do it. You got to get there. You do that hard work now, it's going to be easier in the long run as well.
Absolutely. So lastly, we do have a couple of attendees who are asking about the specific tools that you use, Dennis, and I think I'm just going to shy away from that a little bit, just because we don't want to make the webinar about providing recommendations or sales or anything like that. So we're basically recommending to attendees, if they have questions for you about those specific tools, to reach out to you directly. So just to kind of put that out there. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's perfect. And I'll just say, from a security mindset, I wouldn't tell you anyway, especially not in such a broad audience, because you could use that against me. Because even our tools have weaknesses and vulnerabilities. So.
Perfect. Okay, so we're on the same page there. And last question, and then we'll wrap up the presentation, is timeline. So when and I think you talked about this in your presentation as well. So one of the questions was about when you first brought this to your leadership team to when it got off the ground, what was the timeline of that? How long did that take you, roughly?
Well, I'll tell you, I was fortunate. I was hired because the cabinet realized they needed some more security leadership. I mean, they had a security team doing a good job, but they started realizing that there was a need for more. So I had a lot of support coming in to the organization. So that helped, where other organizations may not be doing this. But I will tell you, I've been in the job for 2 years, and we're still doing it. I mean, you had to go through, and I had to assess the programs and the gaps. And that takes it takes 3 months to get your feet on the ground with any new job, and then it takes a few months to go through and do everything. I mean, it's been an ongoing process. So where I will say we really hit a maturity level and got things swinging in a new direction, I would say probably at the end of year 1. But even now that I'm over year 2, I mean, it's an ongoing process. So the timeline is going to depend on your organization. It's going to depend on the initial awareness and acceptance of your organizational leaders. So, if they know they need it, it may be quicker. If they don't even understand how to spell information security, obviously there's going to be challenges there and longer. So it's hard to really put a timeline on it. I can only speak to what my situation was.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So with that, I think that was a good note to end on. So Dennis, thank you so much for being our presenter on today's MS-ISAC EI-ISAC National Webinar. And also thank you so much to all of our attendees for joining today's event. A quick reminder that our next national webinar will take place during the month of October of 2018. So stay tuned for more information on that. Again, this webinar was recorded, so it will be available on the MS-ISAC EI-ISAC website. And we'll work with the presenter in terms of following up via email with all of the registrants as well. So thank you to Dennis, and thank you to all of our attendees again for joining us today, and hope everyone has a great day.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Dennis.